Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to a fireside chat with a very good friend of the firm, Sarah Tavel. Sarah is a general partner at Benchmark. Before that, Greylock. Before that, Pinterest. And before that, Bessemer. Sarah, thank you for joining us and for speaking to our Network Catalyst entrepreneurs and for coming on the podcast. I wanted to start with where you are most excited right now from an investor, and then we'll get into some company building thoughts. And some of the topics we were just talking about were education. You've made one bet in the crypto space, Chainalysis.
Yeah. You've
been looking at vertical marketplaces. Mm-hmm. You made a bet at HipCamp. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start there? Education.
Yeah.
Where is the opportunity that's been notoriously a category that venture capitalists have not been excited by or have been burned by?
It's so true.
Our partner Anne Dwayne knows all about that. So why don't you talk about why now and where are you interested?
It's a great framing. So many of the education companies that have been founded before, they've been a little bit too much of like trying to do good in the world.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
come on.
I know it's like people. I believe in the 7 deadly sins for consumer investing. It's really hard to get people to be the best version of themselves. Yeah. It just is. But when you think about greed and you think about fear and all these things, what is the biggest problem that's happening in the United States right now for young people? It's not just the United States, it's in Europe also. It's student debt, the cost of education. And it's because we have this antiquated system with our universities where you go into this 4-year program, the inflation rate has been obscene because it's been, there's a bunch of different distortions that have created this inflation problem. And so you have people coming out of college with 6 figures of student debt, and then wages have basically been stagnant for a long time. They're just starting now to kind of creep up, but that's a pretty bad recipe. At the same time, you have healthcare costs going up. Rent is the highest it's ever been as a percentage of income. Home ownership is down. People are more responsible for their own costs because of the gig economy than ever before. So it's whoa, there are a lot of problems happening. Yeah. And so the things that have been really interesting to me, or I've been spending time on, are what are the disruptions that aren't solving the problems that people have downstream when they want to become better versions of themselves, but they're actually solving that immediate problem, which is almost can smell more like a SoFi than a tutoring company, which is things like what Lambda's doing. There's a bunch of different variations of companies right now. I won't say the names because I'm actually meeting with a bunch of them right now that are all
what spaces do they occupy?
Well, it's like turning the idea of a university on its head and saying you don't actually have to go to university to get that credential, to get that job. Yeah. You can get a high-paying job elsewhere. And many of the coding academy schools have been focused on people when they're, they already have problems of student debt and everything else, but can you create an alternative to this, to the 4-year college that gives you what you need and then gets you a higher paying job? I think there's so much opportunity there. So,
and if we look at companies in the past few years that have done somewhat well, if I understand them correctly, I think ClassDojo or Clever are more enabling technologies.
So, one of the reasons why people hate edtech, in addition to what I described before, is because you don't want to sell to schools. Yeah. ClassDojo, Edmodo, which is a company we were investors in at Benchmark, Clever, try to extract money from school districts. Well, actually, ClassDojo sells to parents, but the other ones try to get money out of school districts, and schools just don't have money. And so that's been it's an expensive sales process, and you can't get a lot of revenue out of it. That's a really hard way to build a business. ClassDojo has been interesting because they're getting money out of the parents, which is a pool of money that is a pocket you can take money out of. Yep. But it's still hard. It's such a complicated ecosystem.
Right. But now we're seeing companies just trying to disrupt and build almost parallel systems. Yes. What can we learn from alt school? Do you know?
Alt school, what I would say with alt school, there's so many things.
Or will that company like that be successful?
Will a company like that be successful?
Building just a full stack?
Not venture scale. I think it's really hard to build a retail concept that is a fully integrated school. I think that's really hard. There's so many things you have to get right. But like what alt schools pivoted towards is just doing the content, not actually running the schools themselves. So it felt like it was almost, they took too much on too quickly. And so I think maybe one of the big lessons is just focus. You always, like my personal belief with companies is that you want to get one thing right. And you want to find, and that thing can be really small in the beginning, but get that one thing really right. And then the great companies and the great teams, what they're able to do is they get one thing right and they unlock a new opportunity and then get another thing right and unlock a new opportunity. I think sometimes people, they don't want to build something small, so they start off with a really big ambition and they go for this point. You're not going to win when you do that.
Let's transition to crypto. So you spent a lot of time surveying the space. You made one bet in the space, and the bet wasn't, it's not like the next Ethereum. It wasn't the sexiest bet.
What do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. What I mean, So how did you sort of survey the space? What did you take from it, and where do you sort of see the venture opportunities, and why Chainalysis?
Many people, I read the Bitcoin white paper a while ago, was always enchanted by the idea. It was reading about Ethereum and the idea of smart contracts. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with that concept, but just this idea of like self-executing contracts that, you don't need a third party to like verify that it's executed, but it can just happen automatically on this blockchain. Was like, I remember this quote, in the future we'll have hackers, not lawyers, and that as a philosophy major, I was like, So I started to spend a lot of time when I was at Greylock looking into crypto. I won't go into too much detail, but like when I moved over to Benchmark, I decided I'm going to do crypto. And so I spent so much time reading white papers, Medium posts, talking to anybody I could. And what was happening at the time was that everybody was investing in this thesis people call the Fat Protocol thesis, which is this idea like, oh, if you could invest in the HTTP IP of the internet, you would be very rich, TCP IP. And so everybody was trying to do that with crypto. And they were investing in all these underlying protocols. And there was billions of dollars from venture capitalists and people who probably made a shit ton of money, all this money coming into the ecosystem. And it felt like people were building infrastructure to me. And there was like this, like, if we build it, the use cases will come. And that, we have a saying at Benchmark, which is that our job as investors is not about predicting the future, it's about seeing the present clearly. And I felt like all these VCs that were investing in these protocols were trying to predict the future. They were trying to predict what the use cases would be, and they were dreaming about ordering an Uber from, like, a car from the cloud, and Airbnb, like, decentralized Airbnb, and there were like all these concepts like that were basically mimics of the centralized world that we have, and they just didn't feel to me like they were native and really understood what was important about crypto. And so I was like, well, I don't want to invest in the underlying infrastructure, but I do want to invest in this space. What are the use cases that exist right now? And there was three. There was one that was obviously store of value, which Bitcoin has largely, and I expect will be kind of the major store of value in crypto. There was fundraising, which at the end of the day was what Ethereum was really doing well, which was helping people raise money. And then there was criminal activity. And I was like, and I knew I wasn't going to invest in the next Silk Road or Mt. Gox, but I was like, gosh, it doesn't matter what the price of Bitcoin's going to be. There's always going to be criminal activity that happens with cryptocurrencies. And it's kind of one of those things where you can't put the horse back in the barn, as they say. And so we started to poke around and ended up speaking to a woman, Katie Hahn, who actually ended up joining Andreessen in their crypto fund. But before that was an investigator for the DOJ. And she told me that when they were doing the investigations for Silk Road and Mt. Gox, they used this tool called Chainalysis to do those investigations. And so I spoke to the Chainalysis team and just ended up being really impressed and realized that this was a piece of infrastructure that actually enabled the whole ecosystem. Because if you're a regulated entity that participates in between fiat and crypto, you have to be able to prove to U.S. regulators that you're not in the middle of a money laundering scheme, or you're not funding, you're not unwittingly funding terrorists. And so I ended up investing in Chainalysis, and it's been they've been doing pretty well.
Yeah. But why not some of the fintech infrastructure? Like, why not? I mean, Coinbase is obvious today,
but Coinbase, we missed it.
Things like Tagomi or brokerage or things that are trying to remodel the traditional Wall Street, but in the crypto world, they're helping people buy, sell, store.
I looked like the thing that I looked at Tagomi. And there's a lot of companies there. I miss Coinbase. It was when I was at Pinterest, but I probably would have missed it anyway. But like those all rely on the price of on volatility and the price of these currencies. Even Coinbase today, like their revenues are based on transactions, which is based on what the price of Bitcoin is and Ethereum and all the other tokens. But really, the dominance of Bitcoin still continues to be pretty strong. And what what the price is. And so many of these deals, Tagomi included, got done. SFOX got done during like the ascendant time, and it just felt to me like it wasn't a good time. It wasn't a good way to time the market or play the market. But at Chainalysis, like what was so interesting to me is like it doesn't matter how many transactions happen. It matters how many entities want to participate in that bridge between fiat and crypto. But I believe that there's so much room to run there.
Yeah.
But so we've stayed. I mean, we did an exchange called Bitstamp a while ago. We're investors in Zappo, which is one of the wallets and a Bitcoin custody product.
Let's transition to vertical marketplaces.
Okay.
What is your sort of broader thesis around them? How has that thesis evolved over time, or how have they evolved over time? And where are you looking?
I don't know if I have a great thesis. It's
Or why are you looking there?
Well, I think like we're continuing to unbundle so many different organizations, a lot of these staffing agencies, and I'd say that the first, I spent a lot of time. Me and my partner Bill Gurley, we spent a lot of time looking at marketplaces, and it's been very focused on consumer marketplaces thus far. But we're seeing an emerging category of company that's building marketplaces in a B2B world. There's these giant staffing agencies that have been around for decades, if not centuries. They're just like so old, and they have these antiquated models. And you're starting to see startups come in and basically unbundle these staffing agencies and do what you would expect the internet to do, which is do better matchmaking, lower costs, and these different verticals. And so you see it in healthcare, in finance. What else? And even within healthcare, it's like travel nursing, temporary nursing, per diem nursing. It's like there's so many different areas. And then think about every category in healthcare.
And can these companies be venture scale at a level of
That's the big question. That is the question behind so many companies right now, especially because incumbents are just so strong, particularly on the consumer side.
Right.
But there is a question of if you own travel nursing. We passed on all the travel nursing companies because it's a $3 billion market. $3 billion.
Right.
Most of the markets, people think that $1 billion market is a big market. It's not.
Yep.
We look at tens, if not hundreds of $1 billion markets, and so you're starting with a $5 billion, $3 billion, $5 billion market, and they talk about the play. I do believe in that. Get something right, move on to the next. But it has to be a natural progression, and it doesn't feel like that to me. In many of these markets, it feels like you get stuck in your vertical, and while someone else is going after all the adjacent verticals, and you never really get to go beyond the one you started. That's a risk.
So your life partner, Christine, is a CEO of Evidation, which is a scaling healthcare company. How have you and Benchmark approached healthcare?
With fear.
But you guys made a few bets.
It's funny. Like my wife, she has been telling me for 2 or 3 years when I came back to venture that I should be looking at healthcare, and I should be looking at healthcare tech. And now she's like, "Don't do it." Oh my God! It is just like one of those worlds where the more you understand, the more you realize how fucked up it is. Like there's a reason. Like. It's kind of one of these spaces where you're just like, what a giant market what a huge pain. Like, there's just so much that's broken in healthcare and is going to cripple this country just with the rising healthcare costs. And it's just amazing how many people are going to be working in our healthcare system. It's just like now and then into the future. And yet the incentive structure is going through a transition, which is what creates, is going to value-based pricing, which is what creates this opportunity. But it's just, it's like one of those things where people, it's like, it's going to be, people say this about crypto too, like, it's going to be in the next 5 years, and then it's been saying that for like 20 years. And so, yeah, VR. Like, and so it just, healthcare is really hard. Bill is the one who, he spent a year learning about the space, talking to everybody he could, trying to unlock it. And we made a couple of investments, but it's just been really hard.
Yeah. So you're a traditional consumer investor,
yeah.
We're large. We were talking earlier how, consumer social has been at a low period. Yeah. Talk about the evolution there and where you think that could potentially change in the future.
The way I describe social right now is I call it 95% read, 5% write. If you think about what Facebook was, Facebook started at Harvard when I was there. I was just telling Erik what a slacker I was because Pete Buttigieg was my year. Mark Zuckerberg was 2 years younger. Like the guy who discovered CRISPR, one of the people who discovered CRISPR was my year. So I'm slacker. But
maybe if you were majoring in philosophy, you could have done something like I'm just joking.
But like when Facebook started, it was 100% read. Like there was no it was just like, who's the cute person in my class? Like you got to do that type of stuff. And they have introduced more and more features that let you participate in the conversation. It lets you, and like similar on Instagram, like you're liking things, you're commenting, you're reacting, but it's still this structure where it's very heavily skewed towards reading someone else's content. And Facebook's own research talked about how when you spend time in that passive mode in these social experiences, you feel more anxious, more disconnected, lonelier and less happy after that experience than when you're actually participating in it. And I think that's what's behind Discord. I think it's what's behind the messaging apps becoming so ascendant, WhatsApp included. I think it's behind Fortnite. Yeah. And so I kind of think that we're on the precipice, and it's going to be hard, but Facebook has shot themselves enough in their feet, I guess you could say, that they have so much that they have to get right, including Zuck coins. They have so much they have to get right that they're going to be really distracted and they can't innovate as much as they'd like to. And I think there's an opportunity to create a new era of social, which I'm calling the participatory era, which is this idea that you're creating social experiences where it's about 50-50 read-write.
Yeah.
And what would that look like?
Yeah. And do you think that's enabled by a new platform shift, or is it similar but just radically different approach?
I think it's going to be more about groups. Groups is one of those things that also, these vertical networks, but, that's been talked about for such a long time. And Facebook has owned a lot with their groups, but I think that's going to change. And you see that with Discord. Like, Discord has dominated gaming as a vertical, and I think there are going to be other ones that emerge like that.
And how do you look at gaming or esports?
I'm super interested. I actually, over the holidays, I said to Christina, I was like, I'm sorry, honey, I have to go work and play Fortnite so I can better understand kids. And I did actually lie about my age on when someone.
Were you like, I'm 15?
Yeah, a girl was like, "How old are you?" I was like, 27. Didn't lie that much, but I did lie. But yeah, I think that what I think is just very obvious is that you see the progression of the kids who played Minecraft to Roblox to Fortnite to like other games, and like percentage of time spent in these third spaces, and that is only going to continue to go up. That's not going to go in the other direction. Yeah,
you had a big thesis a few years ago around save you time or save money. Mm-hmm. Unpack that thesis a little bit and how that has evolved or where that is today.
I'll take a step back just to give context to it, which is, I think there are so many companies that try to create experiences for consumers. And what is very easy to focus on is what I'll call like the 10x product. And I remember the insight came to me when I was thinking a lot about Uber. It was like Uber was just growing like crazy. It was ascendant. And all these other companies came up. This is like the on-demand wave of startups. And you could do anything with a push of your button. Like people were talking about the phone as a remote control to your life. Excuse me. So you can get your dry cleaning. You can have someone park your car. You can have your groceries. You can, and everybody was focused on, Uber is about convenience. It's about that push the button, get the car. And that's 10x better than what the existing product was. But I realized that what people missed that Uber got so right is that it was 10x better and cheaper than the incumbent product, which was taxis. And so all these other companies were adding these incremental costs to someone. Like the parking your car thing was just such a Silicon Valley company to make. But, washing your clothing, dry cleaning, all those things. They were focused on the 10x, and they were missing that cost is such an important part of the equation if you want to build a mass market company. Because most of the country, this was a lesson I really learned at Pinterest, most of the country does not look like us in Silicon Valley. It's a very different group of people. And so you as an entrepreneur, you don't want to build a company that caters to the top 1%. You want to build a company that caters to everybody, to as much as possible as a mass market company. And the key in my mind to doing that, if you're building a transactional business, a business where you need a consumer at the end of the day to give you their credit card or their money in some form, is to do that 10x and cheaper. Yeah. And I think that continues to be a timeless thesis for companies.
Right. And how do you think about the idea of when it's something that only the 1% are doing now, but over time it'll, more mass market? For example, like, maybe it's a bad example, but you invested in HipCamp.
Yeah.
Is the average person camping today? Maybe they are. I don't know. But that's growing over time. Yeah. How do you think about growing marketplace?
Well, I think that the ones that start with the 1%, and like everybody, there's so many people that say, they have Tesla as their slide, and like the Tesla master plan was you start with the sports car, and then you get to the $30,000 sedan. And of course, Uber started this way in a way. Like Uber, is it an accident that Uber started this way? I don't know. But like Uber started this way with black cars. And so there's been so many companies. But each time it's a completely new product that, it's a pretty new product that you have to do. Like you can't just evolve a product. You have to like do something different. And it's funny, like Uber figured out Uber X because of Lyft, which figured it out from another company. Like it wasn't as much an evolution as it was like a step function change that happened. Right. But I think like the case of Amazon to me is far more common, which is that you start with something that's really hard and really thin margined, and then you get that really right. You train yourself, you get all the right muscles, all the right habits, and then you go from there into more profitable things. That's a much easier path to go than solving something for this 1% and then believing that economies of scale or a product innovation is going to get you to move down into into the mass market. I just think that's a really hard thing to bet on.
Right. And so let's talk about growing markets and look at HipCamp as an example.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you at the time your investment, you thought it was a underappreciated market. People didn't realize how big it was, but then also that it was going to grow significantly.
Yes, yeah.
How do you think about analyzing when you think markets are going to grow significantly versus when, hey, they're small and niche for a reason?
Yeah. So what I always think about is two things for you guys, which is one, like you want to have a wind in your sails. Like there's this great Mark Andreessen quote, which I think he took from someone else. It actually wasn't Mark Andreessen, it was someone else, maybe Munger, who said, when a great team meets a great market, everybody wins. When a great team meets a bad market, the market keeps its reputation. I don't know if you guys have heard this quote. So like you don't, and I probably mangled it, you don't want to go after a bad market. And so the way that you make sure you're going after a good market is you want to have a why now that creates a win in your sales. Like for HipCamp, what I realized for HipCamp was like, one, national parks, like the attendance in national parks has never been higher. People are like, living in these urban environments, they're connected to technology all the time, and they need to get out. They want to connect with nature. And so you like look at pictures of like Half Dome, and there's like this long line, to get in. The parks you can't sleep there because they've been booked months in advance. And so you've got this like dramatic supply-demand imbalance that was very, very stark. And I even looked at like number of people searching for camping. Google Trends is a great tool you can use to see how if people are searching for something more over time. And the trend line was that camping was growing as more and more people wanted to get out. And millennials, at Instagram, they're seeking experiences. So there were all these things where I was like, okay, this is actually a market that's a wind in our sails that's going to push us forward.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is you look for adjacencies. So like obviously Amazon started off with a super small market, but then they were able to use what they had built and to grow into other adjacencies. HipCamp started off with land that you bring your own tent and food and water filter, and you literally camp overnight in the stars with nothing. That is not me. But and so I think about I'm a New Yorker, and so I think about what I always talk about with Alyssa, the CEO, is that you've got this upside down pyramid where you've got this very small group of people who are the campers, who are like hardcore campers and know how to pee in the bushes. But you've got to move up the market, up that pyramid to the glampers. And so as you kind of get your thing right here, you unlock that next opportunity, which is the glampers. And what they started to see happen was that the landowners that had people camping on their land took some of that money and invested it in building a tree house or putting a yurt there. And by doing that, they opened up the market to this new group of people who were more comfortable doing that type of camping. They made more money for it, and they started to open up that addressable market. And you can imagine that a HipCamp or someone else could continue to do that by making camping more accessible,
right,
and continue to just go up that upside down pyramid.
Yeah.
So win in your sales in adjacent markets.
So if the Peter Thiel School of Evaluating Markets is
Yeah.
own a niche, dominate that niche, and look for
Yes.
adjacencies, and the Keith Rabois School of Market Analysis, or looking at markets, is find $1 trillion market, and build open door in real estate, build forward in healthcare, vertically integrated full stack solutions. Are you more?
I'm more
Peter's?
Thiel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm much. I didn't
right.
know that's what he said, but that's exactly how I think.
And why not the Rabois camp?
I think you need a lot of money to build those types of products.
Right.
And that's a business. It's go big or go home. And I just think I see a lot more examples of companies that have gone something really right and then moved on to the next thing. I think they're really hard.
Yeah.
And Opendoor is a big company, but there's still a lot to prove in terms of whether that's a success or not from an equity value perspective.
Yeah. How have you thought about media? So was there any world in which, Medium, which is a different kind of company, Medium or BuzzFeed or Cheddar, any of these companies were going to be venture backable in your venture scale, in your opinion? And how do you sort of contrast that with differently what Pinterest really figured out? What was sort of key insight, and why didn't Facebook or Twitter build that?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge with media is just the cost structure. It's so many things. It's A, cost structure. It's B, the moat that you build over time more than anything ends up being the brand that you build and that association. And the monetization model is so hard. Like, people aren't on BuzzFeed to, buy something necessarily. They don't have purchase intent, which is why the RPMs or CPMs on the advertiser side tend to be pretty low for media. I just don't see how those are venture scale businesses. And there's also the risk. I mean, what would BuzzFeed be without Jonah? I think that's pretty tough. What Pinterest got right is that, the users create the content. Yeah. And so the cost structure of that is about building the technology we think of Pinterest as a marketplace where it's your content, the pins, and your users. So you've got the users doing all the work for you.
Right.
Which is they're combing the web, they're finding the things that they love, they're bringing it to Pinterest, they're cataloging it on a board, they're writing a description of it. I mean, you couldn't pay people enough to make that business model work and get what you're getting. Like, it just wouldn't work. So that's like number one. Number two is that it's a network effect business. Like, the discovery experience gets better on Pinterest the more people use the product, because each time you pin something to a board, you're creating a new edge in the interest graph that connects those two objects to each other. And so it's like the experience gets better. Like, if you did a search for cupcakes in the beginning of Pinterest, like, it would have been one picture and it would have been a woman with a parrot on her shoulder. Don't ask me why, but that's what happened. And so, the results have improved a lot in, 5 years, and there's just a lot of opportunity there. And then the third thing is that the monetization, like, you think about a native ad unit, in the same way that, like, Google sponsored links was the best business model of all time, because you're doing a search and they're just sponsored results, but it's the same type of content. On Pinterest, it's actually the same thing, which is that the native ad unit is a pin that is a recommendation for you if you're in the home feed, or aligned with your search query. And people have a lot of intent, and it's a reason why they're, it's the plan, I think, is $1 billion of revenue this year, according to analyst reports. Yeah. And so I think that's a pretty special combination. Yeah.
We were talking earlier about marketplaces. We were talking about unbundling. David Sachs had a post recently where he said that LinkedIn is the new Craigslist.
Yeah.
So is there an element of that is true or could be true?
By the way, we were upset when we saw that, because that's a thesis that we've been thinking about pursuing. And it's always annoying when someone else tweets it first.
Yes.
But it's like absolutely an area that it's part of the vertical marketplaces that I talked about. Like, there's, without question, an unbundling of LinkedIn that we think is a really big opportunity, because, LinkedIn, who's had a good experience with, like, anything on it besides the fact that I use it all the time because the network effect is so strong. But, like, we are the target market. It's like, who is the most engaged demographic of people? Venture capitalists and recruiters. But, like, it just feels like in so many verticals, there's going to be opportunities to build something that I think is a really interesting opportunity.
And so do you, what will the Airbnb company come out of? To use the Craigslist example, like, will it be LinkedIn for specific categories?
Possibly. Yeah, without question.
So let's get to some of the company building ideas that we discussed. Yeah. One of the things you've thought a lot about as a board member is building leadership team. So what have you learned as you've watched and advised your entrepreneurs in terms of?
This is like, if you walked away with one piece of advice from me, this is like the big thing that I realized is one of the hardest transitions a CEO has to make, but, like, if you're going to build a successful company, you have to do it, which is, that was a big buildup, which is you start off when you're a CEO being really the CEO of the product. You're 100% focused on getting that product right, figuring out product market fit with your co-founder, like, doing whatever it takes to find that, like, really hot place that I talked about where you get something right and you can open up other opportunities. But there comes a time where the CEO has to transition from being the CEO of the product to being the CEO of the team. Or really what I think of it as like the CEO of the system that builds the system. And so what I mean by that is that I think people hold on to that job of being CEO of the product too long. And what you really have to be thinking about, like, until you have product market fit, hold on to that, clench it with white, knuckles. But once you figure out your product market fit, you have to start making yourself redundant. And you have to start creating a system of accountability where you're pulling forward those incredible executives who do something functionally better than you ever could, and empowering them and making them accountable. But, like, that is a very big transition for a lot of teams to make. And I find that when we invest, it tends to be the CEO who is the CEO of the product. And I remember when I joined Pinterest, Ben was the CEO of the product. And part of the transition we had to do that I've experienced from the inside and have since experienced as a board member is that CEO transitioning through that. And when people say that a CEO doesn't scale, what they mean is that they haven't been able to transition from being the CEO of the product to building the system that builds the system. Yeah. And that's that's such a big lesson.
Let's unpack that in a few ways. First, how do you define product market fit? Or when people think they have it, but they don't, or people don't realize they have it, what does that look like?
I mean, I love the Chainalysis question, which is asking, I hate Net Promoter Score, I think it's BS, but like Chainalysis has this question, which is, if you polled your customers and you asked them, how disappointed would you, like I can't remember exactly how he says it, but it's like, how disappointed would you be if this company went out of business? So you need 40% of people to say very disappointed. That to me feels like product market fit. Yeah. Like if people don't care, like there's so many things where like if the product went away, like I just got this Oura Ring, which is like a sleep tracker. If it went away, but like if Uber went away, I mean, like that would be a pretty big deal I guess we could use Lyft. So there's kind of like, that's actually part of their challenge, you know? But so it's such a important question to understand. And I think Net Promoter, I just don't believe in Net Promoter because I think it doesn't actually get to value, you know, of like what you're providing to the customer.
Yeah. And do you think the same thing applies in consumer social? Because things ride up and down so quickly, and maybe when it maybe they're not the best judges of how upset they would be if and when it doesn't go.
It's a fair question. I think people, you could ask like users of Fortnite, basically as your kind of point. Yeah. And they would, they'd probably have conflicting feelings, but be pretty disappointed. Yeah. And then they reach a point where they stop playing. Yeah. But I don't know. I think Fortnite's pretty sticky.
Yeah. And so when...
But I don't know if I don't
guess
think I
what
have
I'm
a good
saying
answer for
is
your
when
question.
I folded Wrapped FM, which was the Skype for rap battles website, people were very disappointed. And I'm telling myself it was still a good idea because it wasn't that big of a community and wasn't going to grow. But sometimes it's hard to make that call.
It's a good point. So I think part of the Chainalysis thing that you have to understand is you have to double click on who are the people that are saying they would be very disappointed, and then are there enough of those people? Yeah. So we were talking about building leadership teams. When you're moving from CEO to product, CEO of the company, what do the great CEOs do that the good or not as good CEOs don't do? I mean, I think they aggressively pursue talent. Like Stitch Fix, Kat, pretty early on, like the first 10 employees of the company, cold emailed on LinkedIn, the head of data science at Netflix and the COO of Walmart.com, and hired both of them. Wow. She barely had anything. And she was just like, I just didn't know I shouldn't do that. And she met them and pulled them in. Oh. And like the best CEOs, I mean, they are able to close talent that are just so ahead of what you would expect. And that's actually one of the things that we look for when we're evaluating a company or a founder is, how is this person going to be for recruiting and closing talent? Because it is a huge determiner of success. So that's number one. And I think like sometimes people will have a blind spot where they feel they don't want to be threatened by someone. I'll even say Ben in the beginning at Pinterest didn't really have a strong head of product because he and Evan didn't want to let go of product. So there are some areas where that can actually be okay because I think product is one of those areas where you have to be intimately involved as a consumer CEO. But in everything else, like if you are not pulling forward that talent, you're just going to be in big trouble. I think the second thing is like, okay, now that you have the people, how do you make them accountable? Because it's not just that you hire the great people and then you let them do their job, because they're never going to think about the company the way you as the CEO think about the company. You know, you're going to have this holistic view, whereas someone who is hired in as your head of sales is just going to be focused on selling. Yep. And you have to be, there has to be someone who's overlooking everything and helping prioritize, helping keep people accountable. And the third thing is like, look, people are good for a period of time in a company and then they stop scaling. And you have to just be hyper vigilant about where are the holes in your organization and who needs to be up-leveled, what are the new roles that you have to add, and what the org structure is to make sure that everybody works well together. Yeah.
Metrics and KPIs, in North Star for businesses. What mistake do you see entrepreneurs often make there, or what counsel do you typically give?
So if anybody ends up reading my blog, they'll know that I'm a stickler for this subject, which is that I think that there are so many mistakes companies make when they think about their KPIs. One is the fact that it's a plural. Like, I think that you have to early on pick, like, what's the OKR, what's the objective that's most important for your business, and you have to be so intellectually rigorous with that number, because that number will create a blindness in your company. That imagine if, like, when you choose one number, which is what you should do, because like every team might have a different number that rolls up into the main company number, but you have to have one thing where you're like, this is the thing that we're increasing. This is the thing that if our company is successful, it's going to be because we're increasing this number. For SaaS businesses, it's your ARR, CARR. For Pinterest, it was weekly active pinners. And all these companies will have different metric, but you just have to assume that if you have that one metric, people are going to optimize for the metric that they're given, and that's going to create a blindness in your organization that will mean that the other metrics will just decay unless those metrics have to be better in order to move that one number. And I've seen people when you focus on the wrong number, there can be a decaying happening in the rest of your business that you're blind to. And so just an example, if you just focused on, if you're a SaaS business, this is an extreme example, but you just focused on customer churn, logo churn, you might miss that, like, your bigger, and this is such an exaggerated version, but like you would miss that your bigger customers were churning and you were actually just maintaining your smaller customers. So it's much better to focus on revenue retention, because if you're losing your big customers, you'll see it in the number. If you're losing your small customers, but you're gaining more revenue from your big customers, the number is going in the right direction. So it's all about finding a metric that really captures the full value that you want to create. And then you can have other metrics, but the intellectual rigor around that core metric is so important. And then people get lost in vanity metrics all the time, like MAUs, or it's just a metric that makes them feel good, that they are used to reporting to their investors, that they're used to talking about to their team, but it's a lowest common denominator metric, or it doesn't even actually have anything to do with the health of the business, is the most dangerous thing you can do, because then you end up optimizing for this number that doesn't matter, and it creates a blindness across so many different parts of the organization.
So I have a couple more questions, but I want to open it up to questions from the audience.
How did studying philosophy help you as a VC?
So were you a philosophy major? So I think, kudos. So I think it's so similar. So I don't know what kind of, like, I studied Kantian ethics, and you learn deductive logic, right? And what is a philosophy proof? A philosophy proof is kind of, here are my premises, and deductively, like, you can reach to the conclusion. And I think that investing is basically, here are my premises, and like you can underwrite those premises with data from the company, your beliefs on the future, kind of those why nows I talked about with HipCamp as an example. Obviously customer calls, doing research into the market, and basically, if you believe those, who the potential acquirers are, like, all those things are basically premises in your proof. And if you kind of believe them all, then the conclusion that follows is that you should invest. I actually think product documents, like when I was a product manager at Pinterest, it was the same thing, which is that you're underwriting you're saying we should ship this product, and here are the reasons why, and it's experiment results, it's analysis of your data, it's user research, like all these premises, but the logic is such that if you agree with all these things, and this is the way I think, then the conclusion is you should ship it.
For the consumer companies,
yeah,
they're actually shipping product, like physical goods to people. How do you think about margins on that side of it? Well, I'll sell it for 75 cents today, but I'll get my dollar later. How do you approach that?
We don't invest in those businesses.
You're matter.
Yeah, unit economics matter, and it's it's just so many people tell themselves that story, and some of them pull out ahead. Like I think Instacart, it sounds like, has really figured out a way to scale their model. I don't know a ton about it, but it seems like they're doing a good job. But there are so few of those stories, and so it has to work from the beginning. Maybe not from day one, but you have to have a very clear path, and it's not about this hope that margin will come in the future.
Cool. In closing, I want to end with a question we ask all of our guests on the Bros podcast, which is, what is your net worth?
What's the price of Bitcoin? No,
that's a great answer. Too real. So the question is, what's something you believe that about company building or about investing that maybe other people don't believe or is uncommon belief? Or what is something that you have changed your mind on about company building or investing, perhaps in the last couple of years since joining Benchmark?
Can I email you tomorrow?
Yes.
No, actually, this is one of the lessons that I got from Bill. Is I think at Greylock I was very focused. We were very focused as a firm on going after big markets, maybe a little bit more Keith. And the thing that I learned, and as I reflected on more and more, was that the best companies start off really freaking small. I mean, Dropbox sounded like a feature. People thought Pinterest was a feature. People thought Airbnb was going to be super small. Facebook was, super small. These things start really small. And so, I actually passed on the seed of HipCamp when I was at Greylock.
Wow.
Because I thought, it's a small market. And I realized when I, had been spending time at Benchmark with Bill and the other partners there, that actually is what creates greatness. And so, it's to the conversation we had before, there have to be adjacencies, there has to be a win in your sales that will unlock new opportunities, but I actually like things that smell small in the beginning.
Cool. That's a great note to close on. Let's give a round of applause for Sarah.
Thank you, guys.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Please hit us up at villageglobal.vc/network catalyst.